Hey there, Caps fans! Welcome to the second ever episode of the Janaea Talks Caps podcast. Today we're going to be discussing a couple of trades that the Caps have made so far in the days leading up to Monday's NHL trade deadline. Whether the two trades they've made are enough to push them over the top, as well as what some other teams have done so far in terms of bolstering their lineup, and how that matches up with the current Caps roster. So first of all, if you had not heard already, which you definitely should have because you obviously are invested in the Caps enough that you're listening to this podcast, the Caps have completed a pair of trades, the first coming on Thursday as the Caps traded a third-round draft pick in 2019, along with a conditional sixth-round pick in 2020, to the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for speedy winger Carl Hagelin. Now, if you missed the first ever episode of our podcast, first of all, why? And second of all, we were discussing what we thought were some good trade options for the Caps at this year's NHL trade deadline. And sure enough, one of those trades was to possibly, hopefully, go after and acquire Carl Hagelin. This is a good move for the Caps, and we're going to dive into the reasons why in just a second here. But first, the deal itself. As I said, it's a third-round pick in 2019 and a conditional sixth-round pick in 2020 that is going the Kings' way, and the conditions on that sixth-round pick are as follows. If the Caps win not one, but 2 rounds in the playoffs, i.e. if we make it back to the conference final again, and if Hagelin plays in at least 50% of those playoff games for us, then in that case the Kings would get a 6th-round pick in 2020 from us. The Kings as well, they're also retaining 50% of Hagelin's salary and his cap hit, with the real funny kicker here being that the Pittsburgh Penguins, of all teams, are also still on the hook for $250,000 of Hagelin's salary and his cap hit. That was a result of the Tanner Pearson trade. Tanner Pearson, who's been a healthy scratch for the Pens recently. So essentially, at this point, the Penguins are actually paying Carl Hagelin to play for their rival Washington Capitals, just so that they can have Tanner Pearson on nacho duty up in their press box. You just can't make this stuff up. Now, obviously, acquiring Carl Hagelin was on the Capitals' wish list for the deadline. It was certainly on my wish list for the list of moves that I was hoping the Caps would complete. And there are a number of reasons why it's a good move, beginning with the fact that he adds another huge jolt of speed to a lineup that already plays an extremely quick brand of hockey. Hagelin, of course, is one of the fastest skaters in the entire league, and as Todd Reirden alluded to in his press conference the other day, Hagelin should be able to use that speed to his advantage more now that he'll be playing in the Caps' up-tempo system, rather than being the lone speedster in an LA Kings system that can often be likened to molasses or a 98-year-old crossing the street, or a Hyundai Elantra trying to make it from 0 to 60. They don't play a very quick game over in LA, so he should fit in much better here. So Lamborghini, meet racetrack, and all of your new race car friends. And aside from the speed, Hagelin is a truly great penalty killer, which is something that obviously we were looking for at the deadline, should be looking for at the deadline, and he should immensely help a penalty killing unit that has been both heavily overtaxed, as the Caps, it's been well documented, they've been taking far too many penalties this season. Some of that, of course, is on the referees, but some of it is on the guys wearing Capitals jerseys as well. Too many stick penalties in particular. And the penalty kill, in addition to being overtaxed, they've also far too often been victimized for much of this season. So the PK had already started to improve a lot even before trading for Hagelin, and now that he's here, it should improve even more. As well, Hagelin also has a well-documented knack for scoring timely goals in the postseason, much the same way that Devontae Smith-Pelly has done. And DSP as well, if you didn't hear, I should mention that he did clear waivers, which is what made this Hagelin trade possible. And he's been assigned to the Hershey Bears and will be available for the Caps to call up before the playoffs start. Pretty much the best case scenario, if you're a Caps fan, we get Hagelin and we get to keep DSP. Much the same way as being single in your early 20s, it's always good to have as many options as possible until you settle on the one who can efficiently put the biscuit in the basket, or so to speak. Then again, just like dating in your early 20s, the very next day after we had picked up Hagelin, we decided to go out shopping again. And this time it was Nick Jensen who was coming back home with us. The Caps traded a second-round pick in 2020, as well as depth defenseman Madison Bowey, over to the Red Wings in exchange for Jensen, and a fifth-round pick in 2019. So that was the second trade that the Caps made. Possibly could be the final trade that they make before the trade deadline. Just a few hours after they had traded for Jensen as well, they did re-sign him to a 4-year, $10 million contract extension. So basically, what you're looking at now with that signing, they now have their top 5 defensemen all under contract for at least the next 2 seasons, at a very reasonable combined cap hit, I might add as well, of just $23.85 million. And of course I say just $23.85 million, not talking about pocket change for you or I, but relative to the total cap in today's NHL. Basically, that $23.85 million makes up just 30% of today's cap. So with the cap ceiling, of course, being expected to rise again every year, it's not bad for your top 5 defensemen. Not bad at all, actually, if you look around the league and you see how much teams are paying their defensemen. A lot of teams have just their top 4 making that much money. I think at one point, just Rick DiPietro was making that much against the Islanders cap. And yet, here is Mike Milbury up on our TV screens trying to tell us all how to properly analyze talent in the NHL. Yeah, okay. That's a great number 1 overall pick you made there, Mike. But it's okay. I heard that Roberto Luongo guy never turned out to be anything anyways. Now, can never resist taking a shot at Mike Milbury. Now, the reason why I love the Jensen deal, aside from everything that he brings on the ice, which is plentiful, and which I'll get to in just a minute, the other reason why I love this deal is because if you look at the second-round picks that the Washington Capitals have made since the Y2K scare of 2000, we have not had much luck picking in the second round. Our scouting department in general is epic and has been epic, and we owe our Stanley Cup to them, I believe. But for some reason, just that second round has been a tricky one for the Caps. We've made up for it in the later rounds, of course. But when you look at our past second round picks, I'm not at all sad that it was a second that was included in the Jensen deal. In fact, I'm almost inclined to say that I would rather give up a second instead of a third, just because of that draft history. So the Caps second round picks since the year 2000 have been, I just want to give you guys the list here so that you know what I'm talking about. Their second round draft picks since the year 2000 have been in order: Jakub Kuta, Matt Pettinger, Nathan Pache, Maxime Daniel, Mikhail Yunkov, Chris Bork, shout out to a Hershey Bears legend, but alas, still not a good pick for the NHL. Keith Seabrook, Francois Bouchard, Michael Neuwirth, may he rest in peace after his Braden Holtby is my weakest competition yet comments. Theo Ruth was after that, Josh Godfrey, Dmitry Kugrashev, Eric Mestry, and holy hell, 14 picks in, we finally get to someone who's actually made an impact for this team, and that would be Dmitry Orlov, followed by Zach Sanford, Madison Bowey, Vitek Vanacek, Jonas Siegenthaler, Cody Clark, and finally Martin Fervary. So when you hear that list, you probably suddenly don't give two shits about parting with a second round pick as well, being that the Caps have already re-signed Jensen to a 4-year extension. A second rounder is no longer a steep price to pay because Jensen is no longer a rental player. He's ours for at least the next 4 years and at a very reasonable cap hit for what he brings. So what does he bring? Let's talk about that for a minute. First of all, Jensen was pretty highly sought after for this year's trade deadline. There were a number of teams rumored to be interested in him, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, who the Caps just beat 3-2 in Toronto. And the Toronto Maple Leafs, who need a right-handed defenseman more than I need a tequila when Phoenix Copley is in net. So with the Maple Leafs and so many other teams rumored to have shown interest in Jensen, it's impressive to me that the Caps were able to nab him, but that's kind of been Brian McClellan's thing ever since he got here. Constantly bewildering us in a good way with his sick, unbelievable Jedi GM tricks. He's pulled more than a few rabbits out of his hat in his time as the Capitals general manager, and this is another trade that I would probably file under that category. The reasons Jensen was so highly sought after were many, but I think one of the main ones has to be that he is extremely efficient at exiting his own zone cleanly and with control of the puck. He's actually second in the entire NHL when it comes to successful zone exits, behind some guy named Erik Karlsson, who plays for the San Jose Sharks, who is obviously not a bad guy to be number 2 behind in any category. Jensen's ability to exit the D-zone quickly, cleanly, and with control is going to help the Caps tremendously, as the Caps obviously have an extremely potent offense, and this will only serve to put them back on the attack even quicker. So we cannot complain about that, unless, of course, you're Don Cherry, in which case you can probably complain about anything, because it is like breathing to you. Jensen, he makes a great first pass. He's mobile. He makes hardly any mistakes defensively, which if you've watched the total crap circus from hell that has been the Washington Capitals defense this season, then you will be extremely glad for that. And he's also great on the penalty kill, much in the way that Hägglund is. So overall, these are two trades that should really help the Caps down the stretch and into the playoffs. But the second part of this podcast, is it enough? I am of the mind that the big splash type of trades at the deadline are kind of overrated. They almost never work out, probably due to the fact that it's usually quite big egos joining a new team with not a lot of time to figure out where their game fits in their new team system, whereas sometimes it's easier if you're a little bit of a lesser known player. Kind of the smaller your name is, the less pressure, for one thing. And if you're Matt Duchene going to the Blue Jackets, for example, and Jarmo Kekalainen has basically said, okay, we're going to lose Panarin and Bobrovsky, and Duchene, and Dzingel, and everybody else at the end of this season, but fuck it. We're going to spend a ton of future assets to go big or go home this season, and if we don't win the cup, then we're all pretty much fucked 5 ways to Sunday. Well, shit. There's a lot of pressure on a guy like Duchene, and so those types of deals don't usually work out. Think Kevin Shattenkirk in Washington. That's a perfect example. Very similar situation. The Caps were in a major win-now mode. Brian McClellan had declared a 2-year window for the team, and Shattenkirk obviously was the biggest chip available at that trade deadline. Washington got him, and it was pretty much a train wreck. So it's a very similar circumstance. But if you're a guy like Hägglund or Jensen coming to a team who already just won a cup last year, there's not a ton of pressure, and that can be an environment that's very conducive to success. As well, the smaller name guys are usually smaller name because they play a much simpler game than the Matt Duchenes or the Artemi Panarins of the trade market. And so that can and does make it a lot easier to fit in with a new team, especially when you only have 6 weeks or so of hockey left until the playoffs begin, and then you're being thrown to the wolves. I was also somewhat inclined to think that the Caps could have done nothing at the deadline and they still would have been good enough, as they have virtually almost the exact same roster as the one that won the cup last season. They've been a little inconsistent, but they were inconsistent last season too, and they have literally an identical record at this point in the season as they did at this point last season. And of course, we all know how that ended. I believe that this is a team that knows how to turn it on when it counts, and I believe that because I've seen it with my eyeballs. All of that being said, I love the trades that they did make. They didn't tinker with the chemistry too much, and they added a couple of pieces without subtracting anything, which is always good. And they added a couple of pieces who should really help in the areas that they needed some help, such as the penalty kill. I also, I have to admit, I've been hard on Andrei Burakovsky because he deserves it. And while a couple of weeks ago I would have said that they should trade him for a veteran forward to play in our top 9, I did say that, in fact. I actually think now, with the way that he's playing now, that we would be better served to stay away from that with the way that our third line is playing of late. They've really heated it up since being reunited after the All-Star break. They seem to have recaptured the magic, so to speak, that made them the best third line in hockey a couple of seasons ago. And so I think we would be wise to leave them together, and I think that's exactly what Brian McClellan and Todd Reardon are going to do. There's something to be said for familiarity and particularly for chemistry as well. And they definitely seem to have recaptured that, so it'd be best to just leave it alone. And while Connolly has been having a career year, and Eller, he's been strong as well pretty much all season. Burakovsky was kind of the weak link, and he's bounced around lines a little bit, but now he's back with his 2 buddies there on the third line, and he's really picked it up. He's really picked up his play since the All-Star break, and that really adds a whole other dimension to that line. So I think the top 9 is set for the playoffs right now, and if all goes well, we can just roll with that. The defense, of course, has been a shit show this season, at times making us all want to just take our eyeballs out with an ice cream spoon and then dump them in acid just for good measure. But it is the same defense that won the Stanley Cup last season, playing a very stingy brand of hockey. And just like the rest of the team, I do have faith that they can and will turn it on when it counts. It's all really mental mistakes and laziness that's plaguing them anyways, quite frankly, which even if it is infuriating, it is easily correctable with a little bit of effort. So even though it pisses me off for the sake of our hopes of repeating as Cup champs, I would much rather be seeing these types of mental mistakes right now rather than physical ones that can't be fixed. So basically, all in all, when you look around the league and you ask me if I think the Caps have done enough ahead of the trade deadline, I say yes, they have. I think that you could put this team up against anyone in the East, certainly, or anyone in the West, and I would give the Caps, at worst, I would say a 50% shot at coming out on top over anyone, which is really all you can ask for in the salary cap era. Repeating, of course, is hard, and it will be hard, but I think and I believe that this team can do it. So, until next time, Caps fans, take it easy. Enjoy the game against the Rangers at Capital One. And by the way, I will actually be in New York City next weekend to see the Capitals take on the Rangers live at Madison Square Garden. That is a bucket list item for me. The simple Canadian, all the way from playing Timbits hockey, now to traveling all the way to the bright lights of New York City to see my boys take on an Original Six team, as well as, of course, one of our biggest rivals at the world's most famous arena. So I'll be doing the podcast from the Big Apple next week, so stay tuned for that. And you all can expect a win at Madison Square Garden, by the way, because I do have a great track record. I was in the building for Game 5 in Vegas, for those of you who do not know. So with that, I will leave it until next time. Let's go Caps!